Welcome back to Afro-Asia Empire. For his entire life, every room Do Yakan walked into rearranged itself around him. Women straightened, men stepped back. The city called him Young Master, like it was his name. And then one Tuesday, a woman he'd never met looked directly at him and looked away like he was a coat rack. He was the most wanted man in Seoul. She was an engineer with a deadline and no time for him. And the terrifying part, the part that would unmake a 100-year-old family before it was over, was that she wasn't playing hard to get. She just didn't care. Somewhere across the city, a man who needed Yakan adored had already noticed the crack. And he was going to use her to break it wide open. If you've ever been the one person in the room who refused to perform, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where my people are watching from. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, stay with me. Because this is the story of the night the young master learned what his own face looks like when nobody's impressed. The problem with being adored, Do Yakan would eventually learn, was that it left you with no idea what your own face did when it wasn't being watched. He had never had to know. For 29 years, the city had been a mirror that always flattered him. He was the only son of the Dohwa house, the family that had spent 3 generations turning muscle into marble, backroom debts into riverside towers with his name discreetly on the deeds. In Seoul, Young Master was less a title than a weather system. Rooms changed pressure when he entered. He had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. Isolde Achebe noticed nothing about him, because on the Tuesday their lives collided. She was 40 minutes into a fight with a bridge. She was crouched at the base of the eastern pier of the Dohwa retrofit, one gloved hand flat against a hairline crack in the concrete, the other holding a tablet showing a stress model that was, politely, screaming. She was 29, from Lagos, and she had come to Seoul for exactly one reason. The contract paid in 18 months what Nigeria would pay her in 6 years, and she intended to take every one of it home and open a firm with her own name on the door. Achebe Structural. She could already see the sign. Brushed steel, clean type, bolted above a door in Ikoyi that was hers and no one else's. She had not come to Seoul to be remarkable. She had come to be finished, in the good sense of the word. Done, paid, gone. The client wants to pause the load survey, said Mr. Baek, the site liaison, appearing at her shoulder with the particular hush of a man delivering weather he hadn't caused. The client can want that, Isa said, not looking up. The pier doesn't care what the client wants. Who's the client today? Yesterday it was the foreman. The day before it was procurement. I've had 4 clients this week, and none of them can read a stress model. The young master is visiting the site. She did look up then, but not with interest, with arithmetic. Is the young master a structural engineer? Mr. Beck's face did something complicated, like a man watching 2 trains approach the same track and lacking the authority to move either. Then he's not the client for this decision, Isa said, and went back to the crack. Her thumb traced its length, 2 millimeters wider than last week. The bridge was telling her something, and she was the only person on this whole riverbank willing to listen. She heard the cars before she saw them, 2 black sedans, the kind that arrived like a sentence being finished. Doors opened in unison. And the site, her site, the loud, dusty, honest place where men had been swearing at rebar since 6 that morning, went quiet in a way concrete never should. He crossed the gravel like the gravel had been laid for him, all black, no hard hat, which on a live site made her jaw tighten before she'd even registered his face. Rings on half his fingers, a watch worth more than the Eastern Pier. He had the specific unhurried walk of a man who had never once arrived somewhere he wasn't the reason people had gathered. The foreman bowed, Mr. Back bowed, 2 of her own junior technicians, hers, dipped their heads like reeds in a wind. Isa stood and handed him a hard hat. Not deferentially, the way you hand a visitor the thing that keeps them from getting a citation on your site. You can't be past the yellow line without one, she said. Insurance won't cover you, and I won't cover the paperwork. There was a silence with a texture to it, somewhere behind Yakan, Someone inhaled and forgot to let it out. He looked at the hard hat, he looked at her, and she watched, though she wouldn't understand what she was watching until much later. Some expectations sit behind his eyes and wait. He was waiting for the recalibration. The straightening, the softening of tone that happened to people's voices the instant they realized who he was. He had felt that shift 100,000 times. He had come to think of it as simply the texture of air. It didn't come. She was still holding out the hat, one eyebrow slightly raised, because the bridge was screaming on her tablet and this man was, frankly, spending her afternoon. "Do you know who I am?" he said, not a threat, genuine, almost curious, as if he'd found the one door in the city that didn't open to his face and wanted to understand the hinge. "You're the person standing past my yellow line without a hard hat," Issa said, "which right now makes you a liability. Take the hat, mister." And here she did the thing. She glanced away from him, away from the most photographed jawline in the country, and looked at Mr. Beck to get the name. She spent on Do Yakan exactly the attention she'd spend on a delivery she hadn't ordered, and then she spent it on someone else. That was the moment. She didn't see it, because she was looking at Mr. Beck, but every other soul on that site saw the young master's face do a thing none of them had ever witnessed in their lives. A small, involuntary flinch at the center of the brow, the expression of a man who has walked, at full confident stride, into a pane of glass he did not know was there. "Do," he said. His voice had lost something and was hunting for it. "Do Yakan." "Mr. Do," she pushed the hat an inch closer. "Hard hat, or step back behind the line. Your choice. I genuinely don't mind which one." He took the hat. He would think about the taking of that hat for 3 days, how his hand had simply obeyed a woman who had already turned back to her tablet, muttering to a junior about sheer capacity and load paths, as if the conversation with him had been a small weather event that had now passed. He put the hat on. It sat on his expensive hair like a joke the universe was telling at his expense, and he stood there at the edge of her sight, adored by no one for the length of an afternoon, and felt, obscenely, ridiculously, seen. Not seen as the young master, seen as a man in the wrong place, wearing the wrong thing, standing in someone else's way. He couldn't stop thinking about it. She had stopped thinking about him before his car cleared the gravel. That night, in a penthouse that overlooked half the city he technically owned, Do Yakan stood at the glass with the borrowed hard hat still in his hands. He had meant to leave it in the car. He hadn't. He turned it over, this cheap yellow plastic thing that had made him do something, and for the first time in his adult life he tried to picture his own face from the outside, the face she had glanced off of like light off a window, and found that he could not. He had no idea what he looked like when he wasn't being admired. He found this so unbearable he almost called someone to come admire him. He didn't. He stood at the glass instead, holding the hat, and across the river the little cluster of work lights on the eastern pier of the Dohwa bridge burned late, because somewhere down there an engineer from Lagos was still arguing with a crack in the concrete, and had already forgotten he was alive. Han Song-woo had built his entire position on a single quiet truth. Do Yakan was worth far more worshipped than working. As long as the young master was a god, Song-woo was the priest who interpreted him to the Dohwa elders, and priests, historically, do very well. He carried the young master's moods upstairs, and came back down with the young master's authority. He signed things Yakan never read. He collected debts in Yakan's name, and skimmed the interest in his own. The whole beautiful machine ran on one fuel, that everyone, everywhere, always wanted Do Yakan. A wanted man can be pointed at things. A wanted man is a lever with a handsome face. So when the word reached Song-woo, and in Seoul, that kind of word always reached Song-woo, that a foreign engineer had handed the young master a hard hat and then turned her back on him to get his name from a liaison, he did not laugh. He leaned forward. A god who can be ignored, Song-woo thought, is just a man with a famous jaw, and a man could be managed, steered, embarrassed, replaced, owned. All you had to do was find the exact place where the worship failed, and someone had just handed him a map to it, drawn in the shape of a woman. He would tell people, later, that he'd engineered everything that followed. He hadn't. He only found the crack and pride. Every decision that actually mattered, Isolde Achebe made herself. Here is what Song-woo did. He made a phone call, and the retrofit's next round of permits, routine, already approved in every meaningful way, quietly stalled, pending ownership sign-off. The message that came down to the site was simple. The survey could not proceed unless the young master personally supervised the works. Song-woo expected this to do two things. He expected Yakan, given a reason to hover near the woman who'd ignored him, to preen and chase and make a fool of himself in the ancient way of men who've never been refused. And he expected Isolde, given a powerful man underfoot, to either melt into flattery or file a complaint. Either one, Song-woo could carry upstairs. The young master is compromised. The young master is a liability. Perhaps the young master should be set aside. What actually happened was that Isolde Achebe put the young master to work. He arrived on the second morning in a hard hat he'd bought himself. Isolde noted this, the way she noted load and weather and the reliability of a supplier, and said nothing about it. She simply handed him a clipboard, tapped a column, and said, "You're supervising." "Fine, supervise this. When a truck comes through that gate, you write the plate, the time, and the tonnage on the docket. If the number on the docket doesn't match the number on the truck, you flag me. Can you count?" Somewhere behind them, a junior technician made a sound like a man swallowing his own tongue. Yakan looked at the clipboard. In 29 years, no one had ever handed him a task whose entire purpose was not to flatter him. Every job he'd ever been given had been a costume. Chairman of this, honorary that, a title on a letterhead built to make him feel large. This was a clipboard, a pen, and a woman who genuinely needed the plates counted, and did not care in the slightest whether he enjoyed it. "I can count," he said. "Good," said Isolde, and walked off to shout at the crane. He counted plates. He wrote times and tonnages in handwriting that got steadier as the morning went on. And a strange thing happened inside Do Yakan while he stood at a dusty gate doing an honest small task for a woman who wasn't watching him. He could breathe. There was no air to read, no pressure to manage, nobody's expression to be responsible for. For a few hours he was simply a man with a job, and the relief of it frightened him more than any threat Song-woo could have dreamed up. At noon, she found him at the railing on the north side, looking across the water, and made the mistake, or he'd think of it later as the beginning of everything, of standing next to him for 90 seconds. "That tower," Isolde said, nodding at a glossy residential block on the far bank, one of the Dohwa developments, his name on the deed. "The drainage is wrong. You can see it from here if you know what you're looking at. Water's going to track down the inside of that east face within 5 years, and they'll blame the weather." She said it the way you'd mentioned that it might rain. Not to impress him, just true. "That's ours," Yakan said. "I know. I looked up who I was working for before I took the contract. I always do." She glanced at him, actually at him, for the first time, a full second of engineer's attention. "Did you build it?" "My family built it." "That's not what I asked." He opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he said finally. "I've never built anything." Isolde nodded, unsurprised, and looked back at the tower. "Then you should learn. You've got the sights. Shame to own them and not know what's holding them up." And that was all. She went back to work. She had not been unkind. She had not been kind. She had simply told him the truth, as though he were a person who could bear one, which no one had done for him in his entire adored life. He learned the word for sheer that afternoon. He said it wrong twice. The second time, Isolde almost laughed, caught it, turned it into a cough, but he saw it, and something in his chest did a thing it had no business doing over a badly pronounced engineering term. The dignity came later, and it came the way it always did with her. Sideways, and not for his benefit. Near the end of the day, a junior tech, emboldened by the strangeness of the week, muttered to another just loud enough. "Young master's playing construction. How long before he cries about a broken nail?" Issa's head turned. The whole site felt the temperature drop. "Say that again," she said. Not loud, the junior went gray. "On my site, nobody gets mocked for doing the work. Not him, Not you, not the man who empties the skip. You want to laugh at someone, laugh at the engineer who can't count a docket. Oh wait, that's your job tomorrow, and you're bad at it. Get back to the rebar. She hadn't done it for Yakan. That was what undid him, standing 3 meters away pretending to read a plate number. She'd have done it for anyone on that site. The skip man, the crane operator, a stranger. She defended the work, not the young master. Her respect wasn't a currency you could buy with a famous name. It was a standard she held for everybody, and somehow that made receiving it feel like the only real thing that had ever happened to him. That evening they ate cheap gimbap on an overturned crate as the sky went blue dark and the sodium lamps came on. Hard hats off. He asked her, carefully, what she wanted, really wanted, and she told him about the sign. Brushed steel, Ikoyi, her name and no one else's. She told him like it was a load calculation, certain and unsentimental, and he understood that this woman had a whole life pointed away from him like a compass needle, and that he was, at most, whether she was passing through on the way to somewhere she'd already decided to be. He should have found that humbling. He found it magnetic. Across the river, in a car with the engine off, Han Song-woo lowered a long lens and looked at the 2 silhouettes on the crate, the young master, hard hat in his lap, leaning toward a woman who was not leaning back, and understood that his plan had curdled into something worse than failure. Yakan wasn't chasing. Yakan was changing. An adored young master, Song-woo could sell forever. A young master who'd learned to breathe air that didn't come pre-flattered, was a young master who might, one day, look at the whole machine, the priest included, and simply set it down. That could not be allowed. So Song-woo pulled a different thread, not the young master's, hers. He made one more call, and a week later a terse email landed in Isolde Achebe's inbox, on official letterhead, informing her that her work visa, the visa that tied her whole soul life to the goodwill of the people funding the bridge, had been flagged for review. Issa read it once, at her desk in the dark container office. Her fatigue burned off like fog. She did not panic. She was, before anything else, an engineer, and this was simply a new load appearing on a structure she thought she'd already solved. She picked up her phone. She scrolled past Yakan's name without pausing on it. She did not, would not, run to a powerful man to fix a problem a powerful man had almost certainly caused, and dialed her embassy's after-hours line instead. Outside the container, headlights she didn't recognize swept slowly across the wall, paused, and went dark. Do Yakan found out about the visa the way he found out about most things, because Song-woo wanted him to. It was meant to be a demonstration. See how fragile she is, young master. See how easily her whole life here bends. Come back to us. Be a god again. Gods don't fall for engineers who can be deported on a Tuesday. Instead, Yakan drove to the site at 7 the next morning to save her, because that was the only shape rescue had ever taken in his life. One phone call, overwhelming power, and gratitude on the other end. He stood in the doorway of her container office, like the answer to a question that hadn't finished being asked. It's handled, he said. The visa. Sung-woo overreached. I know it was him. I've already spoken to the ministry contact. It goes away today. You'll never hear about it again. And then he waited. This was the part where the room rearranged itself around him, where fear became relief, became warmth, became that softening he had watched arrive on 10,000 faces. He had done a good thing, a powerful thing for her. He was ready to be, at last, adored by the one person who never had been. Issa put down her pen. So you can revoke it, she said slowly, and you can unrevoke it, with one phone call, either direction. Yes. Then nothing's handled. She stood, and there was no anger in her, which was the worst of it. There was something close to gentleness, the kind you offer a person who genuinely doesn't understand what they've just admitted. You just showed me the leash is real. You're only offering to hold it more gently than the last man. Yakan, look at me. I did not cross the world to spend 18 months being a woman whose right to work depends on whether the Dohwa house likes her this week. If my whole life here runs on your family's mood, if some man can end me with a call, and another man can save me with one, then I've already lost the exact thing I came here to build. I would rather lose the contract. You'd lose everything, he said, and he heard how it sounded even as it left him, over pride. She almost smiled. Not pride, ownership. You, of all the people alive, should know the difference between the two. You've spent your whole life confusing them. He left without another word, because there wasn't one, and for 3 days, Do Yakan, who had never in his life been without an answer, a car, a call to make, a room to walk into, did nothing but sit in his beautiful penthouse and think about the difference between pride and ownership. He looked at his family for the first time, really looked. The towers with his name on deeds he'd never signed, the adoration he had never once earned, inherited, like a watch. Song-woo, the smiling priest, carrying Yakan's face upstairs and Yakan's money into his own pocket. The whole vast machine that required Do Yakan to be a worshipped god so that other men could be quietly, enormously rich in his shadow. He had thought all his life that he owned half the city. She was right. He had never owned anything. He had been owned, beautifully, expensively, completely, since the day he was born. The city was not a mirror that flattered him. It was a leash, and it had simply been made of silk, so he'd never felt it pull. While he sat with that, Isa did what she always did. She solved her own problem. She did not wait for his rescue, and she did not need it. She invoked an international arbitration clause buried in her own contract, the one she'd read and no one else had, and she walked into the embassy with the paperwork already tabbed and flagged, and by the end of the week the visa review collapsed under its own illegality. She had saved herself before he'd finished feeling sorry for her. She was never the fragile thing Song-woo had tried to make her. But the Dohwa house did not forgive being refused through their young master. Quietly, cleanly, in retaliation, they killed the retrofit contract. The bridge would be finished by someone else. Cheaper, worse. Isa's 18 months collapsed to 5. The money she'd come for evaporated. The sign in Ikoyi receded into a someday she could no longer see the edges of. She had won the fight for her freedom and lost the reason she'd needed it, and she packed her sight gear into a suitcase with the flat competence of a woman who had learned long ago that the world takes things and you keep moving anyway. And on the 4th day, Do Yakan stood up. He did not call her. He did not send a car, or a gift, or a rescue. He understood now that every one of those was just the leash, offered handle first. Instead, he did the one thing no Dohwa heir had ever done, the only thing left that was actually his to do. He put on a plain jacket, straightened it in a mirror in front of a face he still couldn't read, and walked into the Dohwa Elders' Hall, where the patriarch sat, and Song-woo stood smiling at the patriarch's shoulder, priest to a god, and he did not bow. He lifted his chin. "I'm resigning the name," Do Yakan said. The patriarch's cup stopped halfway to his mouth, and on Sang-woo's face, the smile of a man who had just watched his entire fortune stand up and announce it was leaving, died in real time. He didn't do it for her. That was the one thing Do Yakan made absolutely certain of, alone, in the long night before he walked into that hall. Because if he did it for her, then it was just one more purchase, the grandest one yet, a man buying a woman's love with the spectacle of his own downfall, and he was finished, finally and forever, with buying people. He had been bought. He knew exactly what it cost the person on the other end. He did it because she had been right, and he had discovered that he could no longer stand to be a man who wasn't. So he gave back everything that owned him. The renunciation was not a blaze of glory. It was paperwork, and it was brutal. He sat at a long table for 2 days and signed away deeds, tower after tower, his name lifting off each one like a scab. And with every signature, the patriarch's face grew colder, until on the 2nd afternoon the old man simply stood, turned his back, and walked out of the room without a word. That was the disowning. No shouting, just a spine and a closing door. In the Dohwa house, being turned away from was the whole of death. And it destroyed Song-woo, exactly as Isa's refusal had cracked the first stone. The priest's entire power had been the interpretation of a god. With the god gone, not dead, not disgraced, simply departed, a man who had chosen to be no one. There was nothing left for Song-woo to interpret, no authority to carry upstairs, no name to borrow. The elders, tallying what his schemes had finally cost them, had him walked out of the building by two men in gray suits. His last sight of Do Yakan was the back of a plain jacket, and it drove him, in that moment, very close to mad. Because you cannot ruin a man who has already given everything away. There is nothing left to take. Yakan had made himself untouchable by making himself nothing. Then Do Yakan walked out of the Dohwa gates for the last time, carrying a single bag, and stepped into a city that did not rearrange itself around him. No cars turned, no heads. A man clipped his shoulder on the pavement and didn't apologize, didn't even glance back, and Yakan stood there in the ordinary noise with his heart slamming, and then, helplessly, he smiled. Because it was the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to him, and also the first honest breath he had ever drawn. Nobody knew his face, nobody owed him a thing, and nobody was owed. He was, at 29, finally born. He rented a room, it was small, and the window looked at a wall, and the tap complained when you turned it. He sat on the thin mattress that first night, in the roar of a city that had forgotten him, and he did not call her. He would not. Because to go to Isa now and say, "Look what I did," would be to hand her the leash all over again. "You owe me. I burned my house down for you. Be grateful." And he loved her, he understood suddenly. Far too much to make her the reason. He had done it for himself. He had to let it be for himself. Even if it meant she got on the plane never knowing. She almost did. Isolde Achebe stood at gate 27 of Incheon International, with a boarding pass in her hand and a suitcase full of folded high-vis and a dream she could no longer see, watching the departures board tick her flight toward boarding. Lagos was still there. It would always be there. The sign in Ikoyi was further away now, years further, but she had built things from nothing before and she would again. She had come to Seoul to be finished, and she was finished, just not the way she'd meant. She'd keep moving. That was the whole of her, in the end. A woman who kept moving. Miss Achebe. Mr. Beck, out of breath, tie askew, having clearly run the length of a terminal for a woman he wasn't sure would even want to hear it. He told her, haltingly, glancing at the floor, in the manner of a careful man handling something that wasn't his to hand over. He told her what the young master had done, all of it. The deeds, the name, the patriarchs turned back, the single bag, and then the part that stopped her breath, that he had done it asking for nothing, that he had told no one to tell her, that he had in fact specifically not, and that Mr. Beck was betraying that silence right now, at a gate, because in 40 years of carrying other men's weather upstairs, he had never once seen someone put down everything they were for a reason that wasn't leverage, and he could not bear to let her fly home not knowing it had happened. Isa stood very still. The board ticked. Boarding. A voice named her flight in 2 languages. She turned the boarding pass over in her fingers, slowly, the way she'd turn any object she was deciding whether to trust with weight. And the engineer in her, the only part of her she ever fully trusted, ran the calculation clean, without sentiment, the way she ran everything. The question wasn't whether she loved him. That was noise. She could feel it, but she wouldn't build on a feeling. The question was structural. A leash pretends to be a support and fails you the moment you lean. A load-bearing thing takes your full weight and does not move. For 18 months, every powerful man in this city had offered her a silk leash and called it help. And then one of them had looked at the leash in his own 2 hands, the one that made him a god, and set it on fire, with no promise of anything, expecting nothing, telling no one. That wasn't a leash, that was a man who'd made himself into something that could bear weight. The final boarding call came for the flight to Lagos. Isolde Achebe put the boarding pass in her pocket, gripped the handle of her suitcase, turned away from the gate, and walked against the boarding crowd toward the exit, the cold gate light falling away behind her, the warm light of the terminal doors growing on her face, and she did not stop, and she did not look back, and it was, from the first step to the last, entirely her decision. She had to ask 3 people where he lived now, and not one of them straightened when she said his name. That was how she knew. Before she ever reached the door, that all of it was true. A month ago, the name Do Yakan had been a key that opened the whole city. Now a shopkeeper frowned and shrugged and pointed vaguely up a narrow street of walk-up apartments, and a delivery man said he thought a quiet guy by that name had a room on the 4th floor of the gray building, the one with the complaining pipes. She climbed 4 flights. She checked the address written on the back of her hand. She knocked. He opened the door in a plain shirt, no rings, and for one long moment neither of them performed anything at all. There was no room to rearrange, no air to read, no God and no engineer, just 2 people in a narrow hallway with a bare bulb. "You didn't tell me," Isa said. "It wasn't yours to owe me for," Yakan said. "I didn't do it so you'd stay. I did it because you were right. I couldn't keep being a man who wasn't. If I'd told you, it would have been a bill. I didn't want to hand you a bill." Isa looked at him for a long time. It was the specific long look she had never once given him when he was the most wanted man in Seoul, the look she gave a beam before she trusted it with a floor. He stood in it without flinching, which he could not have done a month ago, because a month ago there'd have been nothing underneath to hold still. "I need to say some things," she said, "and I need you to hear all of them before you say anything back." He nodded. "I'm still going home. I'm still opening the firm. My name, my door, Ikoi, all of it. That's not a bargaining chip, and it's not going soft because you had a hard month. It got further away, and I'll close the distance, and it will take years, and I'll do it. That's happening with you or without you. Second." She took a breath. "There is no version of this where you rescue me. Not with money you don't have anymore, and not with anything else. Those days are gone. You burned them. I watched you do it. If you're in my life, you're in my life. You come to Lagos. You start at nothing, because you are nothing now, and you learn the work with your hands like everybody else, and some doors that used to open for you stay shut forever, and there will be lean years, and I will not make them unlean for you either. Third," her voice didn't change, but something underneath it did. "I'm not grateful to you. I refuse to be. Gratitude is just the leash worn on the inside. So don't you dare want that from me." Yakan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was the truest thing he had ever said in his life, and it came out barely above the sound of the complaining pipes. "I don't want to be someone you're grateful to," he said. "I've had a whole life of people who were grateful, or afraid, or impressed. It's the loneliest thing there is. I don't want to be adored. I just want to be someone you'd choose. Even here, even like this, even as nobody." And Isolde Achebe, who had crossed the world to belong to no one, who made every turning decision in this story herself, who had put a hard hat in his hands on the first day and would put a level in them soon, stepped in close. The hallway was narrow and the bulb was bare, and neither of them closed the last inch for a long, charged breath. His hand came up and rested at the back of her neck, careful, like a man handling something he'd finally learned the worth of. Her breath caught. Foreheads nearly touching, everything held in the gap between them. All the heat of a year of her not caring, and him unable to stop. All of it right there, and unhurried, because they had, at last, the one thing his money had never bought either of them. Time, and no one watching, and nothing owed. She chose him, clearly, on her terms. She didn't fall, she decided, which is a different and better thing. The scar stayed, it always does, in the stories worth telling. Some soul doors closed and never opened again. A name that had meant everything meant nothing. The lean years came exactly as promised, and they were genuinely lean. But months later, under a hard, bright Lagos sun that had nothing cool or careful in it, a brushed steel sign went up over a door in Ikoyi, Achebe Structural, bolted tight by a woman on a ladder who'd earned every letter herself. And at the foot of that ladder, sleeves rolled up, a little lost and fully present, holding the ladder steady with both hands, because it was the honest job in front of him, stood a man who had once owned half a city and given every inch of it away. He looked up at her. And Isolde Achebe looked down at Do Yakan, the man who had chosen to become nobody, and had thereby become the only real thing he'd ever been. And for the first time in his whole adored, worshipped, leashed, and finally liberated life, someone looked at him like he was somebody. which, having chosen to be nobody, he finally was. The Lagos light went gold. She held out her hand. He took it. The way, a lifetime ago, he'd taken a yellow hard hat from a woman who wouldn't look up. Only this time, she was looking right at him. If you made it to the end, be honest. Could you have handed him that hard hat and walked away? Or would you have folded the second he said, "Do you know who I am?" Tell me your city and your answer in the comments. Subscribe to Afro-Asia Empire for a new story every week, and I'll see you in the next one.